It was now about 2:30. Beneath the rock of Massabielle, the grotto glittered in the light of its 1,000 candles. Beyond the high iron grille was a statue of the Virgin, standing in the hollowed rock where Bernadette once saw the glowing vision of the Lady in White, the Immaculate Conception. In front of the iron grille and almost touching it, a stretcher was already lying. Beside it, Carrel recognized the slender figure of Marie Ferrand's nurse. He and M made their way through the crowd and, stopping near Marie Ferrand's stretcher, leaned against the low wall. She was motionless, her breathing still rapid and shallow. She seemed to be at the point of death. More pilgrims were approaching the grotto. Volunteers and stretcher-bearers came crowding in. The little carts were being wheeled from the pools to the grotto. Carrel glanced again at Marie Ferrand. Suddenly he stared. It seemed to him that there had been a change, that the harsh shadows on her face had disappeared, that her skin was somehow less ashen. Surely, he thought, this was an hallucination. But the hallucination itself was interesting psychologically. Hastily he jotted down the time in his notebook. It was 20 minutes before 3. But if the change in Marie Ferrand was an hallucination, it was the first one Carrel had ever had. He turned to M. "Look at our patient again," he said. "Does it seem to you that she has rallied a little?" "She looks much the same to me," answered M. "All I can see is that she is no worse." Leaning over the stretcher, Carrel took her pulse again and listened to her breathing. "The respiration is less rapid," he told M, after a moment. "That may mean that she is about to die," said M. Carrel made no reply. To him it was obvious that there was a sudden improvement of her general condition. Something was taking place. He stiffened to resist a tremor of emotion, and concentrated all his powers of observation on Marie Ferrand. He did not lift his eyes from her face. A priest was preaching to the assembled throngs of pilgrims and patients. Hymns and prayers burst out sporadically, and in this atmosphere of fervor, under Carrel's cool, objective gaze, the face of Marie Ferrand slowly continued to change. Her eyes, so dim before, were now wide with ecstasy as she turned them toward the grotto. The change was undeniable. The nurse leaned over and held her. Suddenly, Carrel felt himself turning pale. The blanket which covered Marie Ferrand's distended abdomen was gradually flattening out. "Look at her abdomen," he exclaimed to M. M looked. "Why, yes," he said, "it seems to have gone down. It's probably the folds in the blanket that give that impression." The bell of the basilica had just struck 3. A few minutes later, there was no longer any sign of distension in the girl's abdomen. Carrel felt as though he were going mad. Standing beside Marie Ferrand, he watched the intake of her breath and the pulsing at her throat with fascination. The heartbeat, though still very rapid, had become regular. "How do you feel?" he asked her. "I feel very well," she answered in a low voice. "I am still weak, but I feel I am cured." There was no longer any doubt. Marie Ferrand's condition was improving so much that she was scarcely recognizable. Carrel stood there in silence, profoundly troubled, unable to analyze what he beheld. This event, exactly the opposite of what he had expected, must surely be nothing but a dream. Her nurse offered Marie Ferrand a cup of milk. She drank it all. In a few minutes she raised her head, looked around, moved her limbs a little, then turned over on her side, without having shown the least sign of pain. Abruptly, Carrel moved off. Making his way through the crowd of pilgrims whose loud prayers he hardly heard, he left the grotto. It was now about 4 o'clock. He had not yet examined her. He could not yet know the real condition of her lesions. But he had seen with his own eyes a functional improvement, which was in itself a miracle. How simple, how private, it had been. The crowd at the grotto was not even aware that it had happened. A dying girl was recovering. It was the resurrection of the dead. It was a miracle. This is an excerpt from the CTS pamphlet, I Met a Miracle, by Nobel Prize winner, Dr. Alexis Carrel.